From his first days of power, Hitler knew that he had to bring the children of Germany under his control. The future of the Third Reich rested on their shoulders. Hitler wanted to produce a generation of dedicated and ruthless Nazis. A generation who could realize his dream of conquering the world.
Wir wollen nicht der Letzte sein in diesem Konzert der Welt, sondern wir wollen mit die Ersten sein. Das ist unser Gelöbnis. Und dass dieser Wunsch in Erfüllung geht, seid ihr mir verantwortlich, denn in euch liegt die Zukunft der Nation und des Deutschen Reichs.
The new Germany was to be forged in an organization where boys and girls would learn to dedicate their lives to Hitler. This movement was the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth would expand until it controlled every aspect of German children's lives.
We suddenly felt different from before. We were important and had a mission.
We were like soldiers. We were actually sworn in. Even though we were only 14, we swore to give our lives for the Führer, the people, and the fatherland.
German schools quickly fell under Nazi control. In Hitler's classrooms, children learned the art of war. Even in the kindergarten, they were taught racial theory. Graphic picture books branded the Jews a dirty and poisonous race. SS doctors measured and graded children to weed out the undesirables.
Georg Weber, Augenfarbe 2a.
There's a saying, every little drop wears away a stone. And we were like stones that water dripped onto slowly until we believed it was true and everything was okay.
In the Third Reich, everyone had their function. For girls, it was to bear children. Special classes would mold perfect Nazi mothers. Boys were sent to Hitler Youth boot camps, where they were taught to fight and prepared for war. They would be a new breed of German man. The Hitler Youth movement charmed Germany's children and seduced them to its cause. By the time Hitler took the nation to war, millions had joined its ranks. They learned total devotion to Hitler and would ultimately be asked to sacrifice everything for their master. This is the story of Hitler's children. In 1938, Germany stood at the brink of war with Europe. The highly disciplined Hitler Youth were ready to die for their fatherland. They had come a long way from their roots. The Hitler Youth movement was founded 16 years earlier in 1922, when Hitler was still the leader of an extremist fringe party. The first members were a group of boys who were too young to join the party proper. Throughout the 1920s, the Hitler Youth were branded as street brawlers and vandals. It was only as the Nazis struggled for electoral success at the end of the decade that they began to develop into a serious force. The transformation was the work of a young and ambitious Nazi student, Baldur von Schirach.
Wir sind die deutsche Zukunft. Wir sind das Deutschland von morgen.
Von Schirach set about completely restructuring the Hitler Youth. He concentrated on attracting the middle class, as Hitler had done with the party as a whole. Within a year, von Schirach had assembled 70,000 cheering boys at a rally in Potsdam.
That rally was a dream come true for us youngsters. Whereas we normally met in small groups, we assembled there for the first time en masse, and our numbers demonstrated what a political force we had become.
Und meine lieben Jungs, ich glaube an die unbändige Kraft des Nationalsozialismus, die alles vernichtet, was sich ihr entgegenstemmt.
When Hitler came to power on the 30th of January 1933, he promised an end to the unemployment and poverty that had plagued the country. In its place, he would create a proud new Germany. It was a vision that struck a chord with the nation's youth.
I saw all the progress in Germany. People getting work, the flags, processions, torchlit parades. We were excited by it. It was like a mass hypnosis. It put me under its spell.
The highlight of the Nazi calendar was Hitler's birthday. The 20th of April was declared a national holiday. Every year, the Hitler Youth initiated a new crop of 10-year-olds as a gift to the Führer.
Ich war 10 Jahre alt.
When I was a 10-year-old, the papers announced that the German people were giving all 10-year-olds to the Führer. We were actually being given as a present to the Führer.
Boys were sworn into the Hitler Youth in a solemn membership ritual.
The entire troop was assembled on the sports ground. All the platoons lined up in file and publicly swore an oath of allegiance. I remember the words. I promise always to do my duty in the Hitler Youth.
Immer meine Pflicht zu tun.
Meine Pflicht zu tun. In Liebe und Treue zum Führer und unserer Fahne.
The regime was determined to attract the young. Boys couldn't wait to join the Jungvolk, the Hitler Youth Wing for 10 to 14-year-olds.
We boys felt somehow elated. Suddenly, we mattered.
In the initiation ceremonies, thousands of children dedicated their lives to Hitler.
From the local party heads to the junior boys leaders, we were now part of one big community.
The main part of the Hitler Youth was for boys, but there was a separate wing for girls.
We were a new generation, a generation that would one day rule Greater Germany. It made sense to us.
I was looking for comradeship, friendship, and something constructive to do. Most of all, though, I sought recognition, and I found it there.
We felt more at ease in the group with the uniform and the sing-alongs than we did at home with our parents.
They said of anyone who wasn't a member, he's not one of us, he's an outcast. He doesn't fit into the community of the Greater German Reich.
As the Nazis tightened their grip on Germany, the Hitler Youth movement's drive for members gathered pace. They would use any means possible to seduce Germany's youth. For many boys, loyalty to the Führer replaced loyalty to their families.
Ich habe ja mich dann als Hitlerjunge geschämt. Zu meinem Bedauern muss ich das heute sagen. Aber
I'm sorry to have to admit that when I was a member of the Hitler Youth, I was actually ashamed of my father because he wanted nothing to do with National Socialism.
Nationalsozialismus nichts wissen wollte. Und ich habe mit meinem Bruder in einer Kammer neben der Küche geschlafen.
My brother and I slept in a little room next to the kitchen. One night I heard voices. I heard that it was a Jew and he wanted to cross the border.
Und da hat mein Vater gesagt, soll da bleiben, bis da oben bringt ihn lieber.
My father said he'd take him over that night. And so he crossed the border with the Jew and came back alone. I wished, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I wished at that very moment that I wasn't the son of such parents.
But in many homes, parents were happy to see their children become diligent Nazi pupils.
Es hat Elternhäuser gegeben, wo
There were homes where the boys were told, keep your hearts free. It wasn't like that with me. All my classmates' parents supported the Nazis.
alle Eltern für die Nazis. Niemand hat mich.
No one encouraged me or gave me the nerve to oppose the Nazis. And everything was 100% in those days. I succumbed to the Nazis 100%.
100%ig. Also ich bin 100%ig dann den Nazis verfallen.
The regime ensured that children repeatedly heard a simple yet seductive message. They were Germany's future.
The concept of youth was idealized.
Ihr seid einmal Deutschlands Zukunft, denn ihr seid einmal Deutschland. Ihr seid einmal unser Volk. Ihr seid einmal nicht die Hoffnung, sondern ihr müsst dann die Vollendung dessen sein, was wir erhoffen.
Ihr seid.
You are. The young are. Old people have no idea. They're past it. They've had their day. Young people love to hear that kind of thing.
Menschen an.
By 1935, the Nazis had charmed 4 million young Germans into joining the Hitler Youth, half the nation's children. It was now time to forcibly recruit the rest. In 1935, a mass rally was organized at Nuremberg by the leader of the Hitler Youth, Baldur von Schirach.
Mein Führer, ich melde Ihnen die größte Jugendkundgebung der Welt. Ich melde Ihnen den freiwillig vollzogenen Eintritt von 917.445 Jugendlichen am 20. April dieses Jahres. Heil Jugend!
Als wir dann diese Mengen sahen, dass wir nicht allein...
When we saw the crowds, and there were thousands and thousands of us, all in the same uniform, we felt elated because they were all like us. I saw boys cry. To me, that was unusual. In uniform, in the middle of the day, they were crying. I went over to one of them because it bothered me that a German boy in our group should be crying. I asked what was wrong, and he said, "It was so lovely. It was so lovely that I'm trembling."
Das ist so schön, ich zittere.
The rally was an important propaganda tool in the Nazis' policy of Gleichschaltung, the idea that class should be eradicated from German society. For the Nazis, the Hitler Youth was a shining example of Gleichschaltung at work.
The uniform made us all virtually equal, although we came from different social classes. A uniform put the son of a tradesman or a worker on the same level as the son of a professor. We were comrades.
Meine Kameraden, nach Ihrem Befehl, mein Führer, steht hier eine Jugend, die keine Klasse und keine Kaste kennt.
This imposition of uniformity meant the dispossession of the German boy and the destruction of his individuality. This was von Schirach's aim, and he achieved it.
Alle Jugend dem Führer, das ist die Parole der HJ. Und wie in den vergangenen Jahren rufen wir auch heute den Jahrgang der 10-Jährigen zum Dienst unter Adolf Hitlers Fahne.
In 1936, as Germany prepared to host the Berlin Olympics, the Hitler Youth movement launched its most ambitious recruitment drive yet. Boys turning 10 that year were identified from birth certificates, and their parents were then visited by Hitler Youth members. A mixture of charm and threats persuaded 90% of parents to enroll their children. Those who refused to join faced sanctions.
It wasn't what I'd call voluntary. There was no real possibility, at least in normal circumstances, of not joining the Hitler Youth or the Jungvolk. That is, if you didn't want to be a real outsider, even at school.
Vom HJ-Gericht hatte die Schule ein Schreiben gekriegt, dass ich von der
The school got a letter from the Hitler Youth Tribunal saying I should be expelled. I didn't deserve to go to a grammar school because I hadn't joined the Hitler Youth.
Und der Direktor hat dann
The headmaster then suggested to my parents that they might like to take me out of school straight away.
melden möchten, noch am selben Tage vom Gymnasium.
Non-Nazi youth groups continued to meet, but if discovered, they risked trouble from the Hitler Youth security patrols.
We were just having a normal meeting when a Hitler Youth patrol of 20 or 25 boys, all strapping lads, burst in and started to thrash us.
Der Höhepunkt war vielleicht der, dass wir einmal, als wir von
Our worst experience came one Sunday evening when we were returning from an excursion. The Hitler Youth were waiting on the bridge over the Oder. They beat us up and pushed the leader of our small group, 19-year-old Konrad Feicht, off the bridge.
von der Brücke geschmissen.
The Hitler Youth had annexed every other youth movement in Germany.
We thought that now we could determine how society was organized. The other youth organizations were disbanded and incorporated into the Hitler Youth.
Any boys who still refused to sign up felt the consequences.
Nun gingen die stramm dort vorbei, mit der Fahne voran.
They marched briskly past, the flag at the front. Suddenly one of them stepped out of the middle of the column, boxed my ears and said, "Salute the flag." Naturally, I was shocked.
Stand da und war natürlich schockiert. Du darfst nicht abseits stehen.
I thought I'd better not be left out. If I joined, I wouldn't be punched. I'd be one of them, and then I might do the punching.
Plötzlich hörte mein Vater Schläge, Trommelschläge.
Suddenly, my father heard the sound of drum beats. I heard them too. They were getting closer. They echoed dreadfully in the narrow street. Then I remembered that my classmates had said, "If you don't join the Jungvolk, we'll come and get you." Is that what was happening?
Sollte das wahr werden?
They came closer, formed a semicircle outside our door. Then the doorbell rang. We were afraid. I went out, and 2 boys came either side of me and led me to the last of the groups, and I had to fall in line. I saw another boy in civvies, and I realized they were rounding up more boys. We started marching, and the marching itself fused us into a single entity. If you control the streets, you control the people.
Der hatte die Menschen.
Every conceivable youth activity was now under Nazi control.
The idea that every Hitler Youth and Jungvolk member could do whatever he was interested in was the great attraction. But you could only do that if you were good enough.
Man durfte zuerst auch nur, wenn man gute Leistungen gebracht hatte.
Boys were forced to compete at everything. They were bullied and humiliated if they didn't fit in.
If you couldn't jump more than 5 meters, you were a loser. You were rejected and ridiculed.
Ausgestoßen und lächerlich gemacht.
Leistung musste man auf irgendeine Weise bringen, jeder auf seine Art.
You had to be good at something. Everybody could be good at something. Develop a positive self-image and feel important.
Gefühl entwickeln und sich bedeutend fühlen.
The Hitler Youth taught boys vocational skills so that one day they could fuel the German war effort. But even in the factories and workshops, a competitive element was introduced.
Wir haben im Reichsberufswettkampf die gesamte junge Generation Deutschlands auf dieses Leistungsprinzip verpflichtet.
You got a certificate to say that you had passed with a certain mark. Naturally, it was an honor.
The toughest and most loyal Hitler Youth members quickly advanced.
We were assessed by our platoon leaders on the basis of points awarded for sport, field exercises and so on, and also for how we behaved, how well we sang and how clearly we spoke when we explained something. All these attributes were noted, and that was how one rose through the ranks.
Jeder lauerte drauf, eine neue Schnur.
Everyone was dying to get a new lanyard or pennant to signify a promotion. The attraction was that every German could rise into a position of command over someone who in their turn commanded someone else. Nearly everybody had a position of some kind, even young people.
Und so war es auch bei den Jugendlichen.
The hierarchy of the Hitler Youth was an important part of its appeal. Boys were seduced by the idea of controlling their peers.
When you stood there and said, halt, eyes left, eyes right, look to the front, and you didn't have to take part, you were the one giving the orders, that made you feel pretty good about yourself.
Das war immer wieder ein Erlebnis, so vor der Front zu stehen.
It was quite an experience to stand there, give orders, and have the feeling you were important without knowing why.
Ohne zu wissen was.
You were elated because you had a position of authority.
Durch diese Autorität gehoben.
Ein 12-Jähriger kann dann schon 10-Jährige.
A 12-year-old could command 10 10-year-olds. Halt, lie down, for they have to throw themselves down. You set your goals higher and higher. As a squad leader, you had 30 boys under you. As a platoon leader, you had 100. You could order them about. That's seductive for boys. The Nazis knew that, and they exploited it. A lot of boys fell for it. I, for one.
Bei vielen damals, wie zum Beispiel bei mir, hat's geklappt.
The boys were ruled with a rod of iron.
When the order to sing was given, we had to sing. If it wasn't loud enough, we'd be scolded. We were totally straitjacketed. There was no freedom at all.
If I gave an order, I would expect it to be carried out. If I said sing, then of course they'd sing. If I gave them marching orders, they marched. It was taken for granted. They did it as unquestioningly in the Hitler Youth as they did it later in the army.
Nichts ist möglich, wenn nicht ein Wille befiehlt, denn immer die anderen zu gehorchen haben. Von oben beginnend und ganz unten erst endend.
Orders were followed blindly. You didn't question them. Orders were orders. It was simple. If you didn't obey, you would be treated accordingly.
Hitler, Junge Hitler, bittet von der weiteren Teilnahme an einem Lehrgang entbunden zu werden. Na nu? Was ist denn mit dir los? Ja, Führer, ich glaube, ich schaffe das nicht, was dir alles verlangt wird. Ich denke, du willst Offizier werden. Und da willst du schon nach 3 Tagen schlapp machen. Ich will dir mal was sagen. Ob du das hier schaffst oder nicht, das bestimmen wir und nicht du. Reiß dich mal gefälligst zusammen. Jawohl, Führer. Wegtreten, wegtreten.
The individual didn't count. They never asked, can you do that? How do you feel? Do you like that? We had to get on with it, and we did. We had taken the oath.
The Hitler Youth boys were being trained to follow orders for a reason. They had to be prepared to carry out the extremes of Nazism without question. The Hitler Youth operated in clubhouses as well as training camps. Here, youth leaders taught boys about military tactics and lectured in Nazi philosophy.
We learnt about the lives of the Nazi leaders and the anti-Jewish campaign. It was like a school lesson in National Socialism.
Hitler Youth leaders were given carefully selected phrases to read out.
The goal of the Jews is to brutally rule other races. In this, the Jewish people reveals itself in all its madness and its brutal thirst for power.
They were elegant, very elegant indeed, in the way they told us things in small doses. One small dose at a time, and then a tiny bit more. That way we didn't notice what they were doing to us.
When we were marching, we used to bawl out an unbelievably vile song. Hang the Jews, line the fat cats up against the wall. Probably not one of us stopped to think about what those words actually meant.
What the boys learned in meetings was put into practice on the streets.
Then we started marching. We came to the local bank. There was a glass case in which Der Stürmer, the extreme Nazi tabloid, was displayed. Our platoon leader saw the case and roared, "Death to Judah." The cry was taken up by the boys in the front and travelled down the line to me at the back. It was a crisis of conscience. I couldn't join in, I couldn't. I just mouthed the words. But then something clicked. The idea came to me that Judah was a country somewhere far away, and if I said, "Death to a country," I wasn't hurting people. I joined in the shouting. It was terrible.
On the 9th of November 1938, the Nazis launched a major attack on the Jews. It became known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass.
Ich bin voller Begeisterung dem Feuer nachgegangen.
Enthusiastically, I went to see where the fire was burning. It was next to our school. I wondered why they only put out the house fires next door and not the main fire, until a Hitler Youth friend said, "Hey, we lit that. Weren't you there this morning when we smashed the Jews' shop windows and took stuff?" Then I saw stormtroopers and Hitler Youth members carrying out Torah scrolls. They cheered as they threw them onto the fire. 2 days after Kristallnacht, all Ludwigsburg was whispering, "Our doctor, Dr. Pintus, is dead." He was arrested on Kristallnacht in the evening and took cyanide in the prison van because he knew what was coming. I was 13 years old. It struck me for the first time that 3 years earlier I'd shouted death to Judah, and now he was really dead.
Most boys were hardened to the horrors of Kristallnacht. They had learned to trust Hitler completely.
Glaube, der unabdingbare Glaube.
Faith, unconditional faith, that the Führer would do things right.
Ist uns ja damals als der.
He was represented in those days as God, well, akin to God.
Gottähnliche.
And that's how we saw him.
Das haben wir auch darin gesehen.
He was our idol. He was a demigod. I tell you quite honestly, if someone had tried to shoot Hitler, I'd have leapt forwards and died for him. Nowadays, I know it was madness.
In 1932, Herbert Norkus, a 15-year-old member of the Hitler Youth, was murdered. He had died after a violent street fight with members of the Communist Party. Hitler Youth leaders immortalized Norkus as the hero of a film. They made sure every member of the movement saw Herbert Norkus martyr himself to the Nazi cause.
Perfekt. Unsere Fahne flattert uns.
Wir haben den bewundert, den Jungen. We admired him. A shiver used to run down our spines.
Gänsehaut über den Rücken gelaufen.
Du bist eigentlich nichts, dein Leben ist nichts wert, du musst es...
You're nothing? Your life is worthless. You must be ready to sacrifice your life to the flag. It was an appeal to the young that sentenced them to death. Can there be a greater crime than that? It was an appeal made to 12- and 13-year-old boys.
12-, 13-jährige Jungs gerufen.
Früh übt sich, was ein Meister werden will.
Hitler Youth boys were invited to visit army barracks, use the firing ranges, and take part in training maneuvers.
Geländespiele haben wir selbstverständlich gemacht, in denen man...
Of course, we did field exercises in which we tried to behave like soldiers. Move forwards properly. Don't let yourselves be seen. Creep up on them and so on. Children love that kind of thing. And they exploited that. But these games were immensely entertaining, and you can seduce people that way.
Man kann ja auch auf das Spielerischste verführen.
By 1936, Germany's army, the Wehrmacht, was playing an increasingly prominent role in the Hitler Youth.
Das war das Ziel des Führers.
The Führer's goal was to train young people as soldiers. Young men the world would fear. That's what he once said. And the world did fear them.
Dieser Jugend ist die Welt ja dann auch erschrocken.
When war finally came, boys who had been trained in specialist camps from the age of 10 finally had a chance to fight. For the Hitler Youth, war was the culmination of everything they had learned.
It unleashed a certain enthusiasm in us. Poland was a surprise to me as a 13-year-old, but I still remember the entry into Paris, the occupation of Paris, and the quick end to the French campaign. That certainly filled us with enthusiasm.
The country was euphoric after Hitler's success against the French in 1940. Teenage boys from the Hitler Youth rushed to volunteer to serve their nation.
We were eager to become real soldiers and go to war properly, although naturally we had no idea how cruel this war would become.
The Hitler Youth had seduced a generation of German boys into believing in the Nazi cause. But in serving Hitler, many of them would be called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Hitler Youth movement taught German children how to be good Nazis. Its principal aim was to turn boys into tough and obedient fighters. Boys who could then wage Hitler's war across Europe. But girls also had a place in the Hitler Youth, designed exclusively for them. It was called the Bund Deutscher Mädel, or BDM, the League of German Girls.
At an age when you don't yet have much of a personality, it's wonderful to be part of such a huge movement of people, all thinking, feeling and doing the same thing.
The biggest draw was Hitler himself. For millions of teenage girls, he wasn't just a politician, he was a pin-up.
Hitler looked into my eyes and patted my cheek. It was an incredible experience for me. I thought it was great, and I didn't want to wash. My mother said, "You're crazy." And so I was.
Girls would be used to breed a new generation of Nazis. The BDM ensured that they were well versed in their duties.
We need mothers who understand their role in life. They should follow the beat of their light hearts, be proud to call themselves German, and carry out their duties with joy and conviction.
The Hitler Youth movement taught Germany's girls to become Hitler's most loyal servants. By the end of the war, they would be asked to sacrifice everything for their idol. The Bund Deutscher Mädel, or BDM, was founded in 1930. Within a few years, it was the largest girls' organization in the world.
We played, laughed, sang, and even plaited wreaths into each other's hair. We celebrated the Harvest Festival because we had plenty of bread to eat.
The BDM offered girls a sense of community and purpose.
It didn't matter whether you lived in a big house or a tenement flat, whether you were Protestant or Catholic. We were all young Germans together.
Girls could join the BDM at 14, or its junior section, the Jungmädel, at 10.
Wenn Sie ein Schulkind sind, ist es für ein 10-jähriges oder 12...
If you're a school child aged 10 or 12, it's a wonderful feeling to go to the headmaster and say, Heil Hitler, Mr. Meyer, Müller or Schmidt. I can't come to school for this lesson. I'm on duty.
In die Schule kommen, ich habe Dienst.
Girls were encouraged to join the movement as a way to serve their country.
I was a young girl of 15 or 16, and tears came to my eyes because I felt that I belonged to the wonderful German nation.
Dieses wunderbaren deutschen Volkes empfand.
The BDM excluded Jewish girls on racial grounds.
Of course, I'd have loved to have been a member. I envied all the girls who wore the blue skirt and white blouse, so it was hard for me. Later, I realized I was Jewish and it wasn't for me.
BDM meetings were used to teach girls about Nazi ideology. There were regular lessons on Lebensraum, the idea of Germany expanding eastwards so the Aryan race had room to flourish.
The whole of the political background certainly wasn't clear to me at the time. I was simply working to pass on what I could.
Weiterzugeben, was wir konnten.
Und die Morgenfrühe, das ist unsere Zeit, wenn die Winde um die Berge singen, tut euch nicht lang verweilen.
Girls were indoctrinated through songs.
Forwards, forwards, the fanfares blare. Forwards, forwards, youth knows no danger. Germany must shine, even if we die.
Youth, we are the future soldiers. Youth, we'll do the future deeds. Though we trembled, no one dared to argue. We were part of a new age. Who wouldn't go along with it?
It was fantastic. Unfortunately, I can't sing anymore. I sometimes feel like belting it out again.
We adopted those words unthinkingly. We just rattled off what we were taught because we thought it must be right.
Weil man glaubte, das muss ja richtig sein.
In Nazi Germany, girls were expected to know their place.
Ich denke, das ist wunderbar. Na, hast du das bekommen? Was hast du Schönes bekommen? Flieger? Na, wirst du auch ein Flieger werden? Was? Wenn du groß bist, was wirst du denn? Was wirst du? Ach, du bist ja Mädel.
I thought it was a terrible fate to have been born a girl.
I couldn't give my life to the fatherland.
Leben dem Vaterland nicht zur Verfügung stellen.
Hitler never imagined the BDM girls would join the army, but their training echoed that of the Hitler Youth boys. At camps, they were drilled like soldiers and faced tests of endurance and courage.
It was really torture. If you said you couldn't swim, you were thrown into the water. Really brutal when I think about it now.
Brutal, also schon brutal, wenn ich heute dran denke, ja.
Marching was an important part of BDM life. The idea was to break down individuality and build a collective spirit.
Of course, if you want to get troops to move from one place to another, they have to march in step. Otherwise, it won't work. Sheep need a sheepdog. Marching in step has the same effect. It's all about discipline.
So Disziplin.
The BDM girls held their own flag days and memorial parades on Nazi holidays. These were deliberately scheduled to compete with the church calendar and marginalize religion in Nazi Germany. New recruits were sworn in at powerful torchlit ceremonies.
Ich schwöre bei Gott diesen heiligen Eid. Ich werde meinem Führer Adolf Hitler allezeit treu und gehorsam sein.
Das war
We were like soldiers. We were actually sworn in. Even though we were only 14, we swore to give our lives for the Führer, the people, and the fatherland.
The BDM's most seductive tool in recruiting new members was Hitler himself. The girls idolized him. A lucky few were invited to his exclusive mountain retreat to appear in newsreels. But for Hitler, the BDM was about more than propaganda. BDM girls idolized Hitler. When he appeared in public, hordes of girls flooded to the streets to get a glimpse of him. It was not uncommon for them to pass out with emotion. For many Germans, Hitler had become a superhuman figure.
War der Übervater.
We called him our Obervater. It's inconceivable today.
Heute nicht nachzuvollziehen.
Es war schon.
It was a deep, heartfelt love. I can't express it any other way.
Ausdrücken.
Exactly like God. For me, he was just like God.
Hitler was single, which added to the attraction.
We said, pity he's not married, a nice man like that. It might make things better for him.
Love letters arrived for Hitler every day.
Dear Führer, will you please accept my sacrifice? I have nothing to give you except my love. Yours, Emmy.
Dear Führer, a girl from Saxony would like to have your baby. I know it's a very unusual suggestion, but it really bothers me that a man like you is childless.
Their requests went unheeded. Hitler pretended he'd given up women for work. His girlfriend, Eva Braun, had to be discreet. Even at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat near Salzburg, she masqueraded as a member of staff.
We went for a walk together, and then I said to her, almost provocatively, "Miss Braun, you're the most envied woman in Germany," because she was with Adolf Hitler. She said, "Oh, Mr. Frenz, I'm just a prisoner in a gilded cage."
Eva Braun would die at Hitler's side, still loyal to the man who never acknowledged her in public. Hitler believed women should be subservient to men. In Nazi Germany, their main task was to bear children. Many girls faithfully accepted these teachings.
What the Führer does is right. That's how it was. The Führer can't be wrong.
Die Frau hat auch ihr Schlachtfeld. Mit jedem Kind, das sie der Nation zur Welt bringt, kämpft sie diesen Kampf durch. Das ist ihr Kampf für die Nation und der Mann hat seinen Kampf. Der Mann tritt für das Volk ein, genauso wie die Frau für die Familie eintritt. Der Mann tritt für die Gesamtheit der Volksgenossen ein, genauso wie die Frau eintritt für die Kinder, denen sie selbst das Leben schenkt.
After the war, they told us we'd been living without freedom. This was new to me. I didn't realize that I wasn't free because I didn't understand the concept of freedom as we know it today.
The BDM told girls that once married, they should have as many children as possible to serve the Nazi cause. The movement also arranged classes where girls could learn how to bring up their children as good Nazis. There was even a reward for providing the Führer with his future armies. Women who had 4 or more children were awarded the Mother's Cross. When it came to sex, the official line was strict. Girls had to keep themselves pure for marriage.
One rule was drummed into us. Keep your blood pure. It's not just yours. It comes from afar and flows a long way, and everyone's future flows in it. Keep the vessel of your immortality pure. It was clear.
Girls who became pregnant outside of marriage were thrown out of the BDM.
Young people were very different then. Now the average age when they become sexually active is 15. It was over 20 for us. I remember how proud we were if a male youth leader fell for us. But we shrugged our shoulders and said, "I'm a German girl." A German girl is chaste and modest and becomes a mother as soon as she marries.
Despite the rules, Nazi officials were not put off trying their luck with the BDM girls.
With the older party members, it was as though they'd been allowed out by their mothers for the first time. And there were young girls around, so all sorts of things went on, affairs and so on.
The BDM girls were expected to take part in huge public gymnastic displays. These were meant to teach an important lesson. Girls should not think of themselves as individuals, but as part of the German nation.
When I saw that every movement was identical, I was incredibly proud to be part of it. It was drummed into us. One wrong movement and you'll ruin the whole picture.
At the age of 18, BDM girls were encouraged to join a group called Belief and Beauty, a living embodiment of the Aryan ideal.
People still rave about it today. It was an aesthetic pleasure to see hundreds of girls all moving in harmony in those short and cheeky yet ladylike uniforms. What was so wrong with it?
The Aryan ideal was echoed in the work of Hitler's favorite film director, Leni Riefenstahl. Her films became an important propaganda tool in teaching German girls the importance of racial purity.
Race was the most important word in our life. There were things that embarrassed me, both at school and in the League of German Girls. Because of my appearance, I was taken as an example of the Aryan race. It was terrible.
We were jealous of all the girls in our class with blonde plaits and blue eyes. That's how far it went.
Once the Nazis had risen to power in 1933, doctors routinely measured and graded children to identify their racial groups. Promotional films explained to girls the importance of a suitable marriage.
Sehen Sie mal, bei sämtlichen Vorfahren die gleich guten Eigenschaften. Guter Jäger, guter Jäger, guter Jäger.
Da sieht man erst mal, wie wichtig die genaue Aufzeichnung der Vorfahren ist.
Ja, und erst recht für uns Menschen. Ja, dann würde die Gattenwahl manchmal anders ausfallen. Nicht mehr zufällig, sondern bewusst wird das Gesunde sich zum Gesunden finden. Zur glücklichen und richtigen Gattenwahl. Gebt euer Bestes eurem Volke, dann werdet ihr zum besten Volke gehören.
We were the best people in the world, and the most competent, and the most beautiful people in the world. Jews are exactly the opposite. That's what we were told.
At BDM meetings, girls learned what the Nazis called racial science. The lessons were reinforced in the anti-Semitic magazine, Der Stürmer.
I passed 2 display cases on my way to school. Young children walked past them as well. The cases displayed a newspaper called Der Stürmer. I have no idea who thought it up. It showed Jews, and I was fascinated by it as the pictures were horrifying.
On the streets, the message was the same. Jewish shops were the targets of graffiti and vandalism.
Dieses ostjüdische Untermenschentum hat seit jeher Westeuropa das internationale Verbrechergesindel geliefert. Von hier aus wurden die Demokratien mit Taschendieben, Zuhältern, Rauschgift- und Mädchenhändlern, internationalen Bankschiebern und Hetzjournalisten versorgt.
There's a saying, every little drop wears away a stone. And we were like stones that water dripped onto slowly until we believed it was true. And everything was okay.
Many girls blindly swallowed the propaganda.
Some were sorry and others indifferent. They said, "We're National Socialists and in the BDM. You're not. You're a Jewish bitch. I have nothing against you personally, but you Jews are to blame for everything." That was the way it was.
Das war die Tendenz.
The regime also targeted other racial groups.
I was even scared when I walked past them in a colourful skirt. They knew I was a gypsy child, and they spat on the ground or right into my face. And they shouted out, "Gypsy trash," and that kind of thing.
The 9th of November 1938 was Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. BDM girls couldn't avoid the carnage that Hitler unleashed on the country's Jewish communities.
They were pulling an old lady down the stairs by the hair, and I stood there thinking, what are they doing? What is this? But then I thought she'd done something wrong and must be a criminal. But I know I vomited afterwards. It upset me so much that it made me sick. Younger children also saw things like that.
So Dinge haben auch Kinder gesehen.
Within months of Kristallnacht, Germany was at war. The BDM girls were to play a far greater role in this conflict than even Hitler could have dreamed. The Nazis invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939. More than 90,000 Polish people died. But Nazi propaganda convinced many Germans that the Poles had been the aggressors.
The enemy was outside us. That bonded us as a nation. They were the baddies. We thought, at least I did, that the Poles had attacked us and we were just defending ourselves, which was okay.
BDM girls were active in the victory celebrations. German schoolchildren wrote essays commemorating the occasion.
We are full of heartfelt gratitude to our William Tell and place our fate in his, Adolf Hitler's, hands. It will be the sacred duty of us all to protect and complete our fatherland, for the arch-enemies who surround us are trying again and again to cut us down in our prime and destroy our country in a war of annihilation. We wrote nonsense like that in those days. That's how we were trained as National Socialists.
The BDM girls were called on to take the place of the thousands of men away fighting.
Die Millionen schaffender Jungen und Mädel in der deutschen Rüstungsproduktion, bei der Betreuung unserer Soldaten, bei der Nachbarschafts- und Einkaufshilfe unserer Mädel, als Helferinnen in den Säuglingspflegestätten, bei der täglichen Zustellung der Zeitungen, bei den Austrägerdiensten der Reichspost und als Hilfsschaffner bei den Straßenbahnen, als Kindergärtnerinnen, in den Nähstuben der Mädel zur Behebung der ersten Not, als Erntehelfer des deutschen Bauern und bei der Unterstützung der deutschen Bäuerin.
On our social evenings, we made things for the soldiers. We knitted for them and wrote letters to them. We felt we had to help them as they were fighting for us.
Wir müssen was für die tun.
Helping on the home front was not enough for some girls who fantasized about doing much more.
Ich weiß, dass ich mich manchmal als junges Mädchen
As a young girl, I sometimes stood in front of the mirror in a heroic pose, imagining myself sacrificing my life for the Führer, the people, and the fatherland. Then everyone else could keep on living in peace and the Reich could be preserved. Every now and then I had strange impulses like that.
Erhalten bleiben. Solche seltsamen Anwandlungen hatte ich hin und wieder.
The older BDM girls took over the role of tram conductors. It was here that one girl noticed the beginning of something more sinister.
Wir hatten einmal eine Sonderfahrt.
Once we had a special trip.
Young women were trained by the Volkssturm, the Home Guard, to prepare them for an Allied invasion.
Da wurde ich zum Volkssturm eingezogen.
I was called up to join the Home Guard. At night after work, we had to go to the town hall and learn from diagrams what the inside and outside of a bazooka looked like. This went on until we knew everything about the bazooka and how it worked.
So lange, bis wir das Innenleben dieser Panzerfaust wirklich voll integriert hatten und wussten, wie geht der Panzerfaust. Es war irgendwo auch ein Ehrgeiz.
I think I was ambitious, but I don't think I expected to die for Hitler. We wanted to fight the people who were hurting us so much. If you can only imagine how much I hated those people, the ones who were bombing us. If they'd come to Stuttgart, I would have fired my bazooka at them.
Like the boys of the Hitler Youth, the BDM girls had been drawn in to fighting Hitler's increasingly desperate war. But he would still ask them to make one final sacrifice. The final months of the war saw millions of young men die on the battlefield. Germany was now facing a population crisis. The Third Reich looked to the BDM girls to provide the armies of the future. The strict moral code of the 1930s was collapsing. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, had already set up Nazi maternity homes for a very specific purpose.
Rassisch und erbbiologisch wertvolle werdende Mütter unterzubringen und zu betreuen, bei denen nach sorgfältiger Prüfung der eigenen Familie und der Familie des Erzeugers anzunehmen ist, dass gleich wertvolle Kinder zur Welt kommen.
In fact, these were maternity homes for unmarried mothers. They were called the Lebensborn, the source of life. Their purpose quickly became shrouded in myth.
She was a leader in the BDM. She was away for a while and came back pregnant, although she was unmarried and didn't ever marry. They said she went to the Lebensborn and gave the Führer a child.
Women without a man who wanted a child went there for 3 weeks to the handsome studs, the blonde Teutonic German giants. And if they were lucky, they became pregnant.
There was an element of truth in these rumors, and some BDM girls had no choice in the matter.
My sister was in a BDM camp, and there was a boys' camp right next door. One night, the directors of both camps opened the doors and windows of the girls' dorm when the girls had already gone to bed. Then they sent the labor service boys over to the girls' camp, and of course they went for it.
As the Red Army advanced towards Berlin, the BDM girls faced the wrath of soldiers bent on revenge.
In diesen von deutschen Truppen wiedereroberten Orten ist jedes Haus von den Grausamkeiten bolschewistischer Soldateska gezeichnet. Die Bestialitäten sind zu ungeheuerlich, als dass alles gezeigt werden könnte, was die Kamera festhielt.
For once, Hitler's propaganda machine was telling the truth.
I was on the run for months. You have no idea. They hunted us like rabbits. They came night after night and smashed our doors in. They said, "Where, woman, I want to..." I won't say the word, but I can still hear the women screaming.
I thought the soldier was going to shoot me. I didn't know the facts of life. In a way, I was grateful. I was glad to be alive. But of course, it was terrible.
As Berlin fell, Hitler committed suicide.
Aus dem Führerhauptquartier wird gemeldet, dass unser Führer Adolf Hitler heute Nachmittag in seinem Befehlsstand in der Reichskanzlei bis zum letzten Atemzuge gegen den Bolschewismus kämpfend für Deutschland gefallen ist.
I wept uncontrollably. It seems inconceivable today. It was as if a close relative had died.
BDM girls were distraught.
My world fell apart. I loved being in the BDM and its junior section. Everything else was a different matter. I never understood that the two things went together.
Dass das zusammengehört, habe ich nie begriffen.
After the death of Hitler, the ordeal continued for many BDM girls. They were ordered to visit concentration camps to see what had been done in their name.
Schuldig von etwas Schlechtem.
We were guilty of being enthusiastic about something bad and applauding it. I feel that is a type of guilt.
How much the German people really knew about the Holocaust is still disputed today.
We didn't know about anything. That's what I can't understand or grasp. Perhaps I don't want to. People still say, you must have known. We didn't.
We knew about concentration camps and torture. We knew they made lampshades from human skin. We knew they pulled people's gold fillings out. I knew all that at 12.
Also ich wusste das alles mit 12.
We didn't know, and no one believes us. It's so terrible. Of course, our knowing wouldn't have changed anything. I'd have lost my idealism even earlier, but I wouldn't have been able to change anything.
Many BDM girls are still struggling to come to terms with what they once believed.
Of course, one doesn't feel free of guilt. But on the other hand, one tells oneself that we were abused as children. But we didn't even realize we were being abused. We thought that what we'd been trained to believe was true.
Geglaubt, dass das wahr ist, woran wir zu glauben gewöhnt wurden. Erkennen müssen, dass man an
having to recognize that we'd believed in a false ideal, that the whole thing was a fraud, and that we'd simply been abused. That really hurts.
Einfach missbraucht worden ist, das tut furchtbar weh.
The BDM girls had dedicated their childhood to serving Hitler. 60 years later, the legacy of Nazi Germany continues to haunt them. From the first days of Nazi rule, education was central to Hitler's thinking. Throughout Germany, schoolchildren were taught about the superiority of the Aryan race and how the Third Reich would dominate the world for 1,000 years.
Was wir vom kommenden Deutschland ersehnen und erwarten, das müsst ihr, meine Jungens, erfüllen.
Nazi leaders quickly realized that normal schools would not be sufficient to groom the future rulers of the 1,000-year Reich. They decided to establish selective schools to create a new elite.
We were to be the future political leaders of Germany. That was the school's goal.
The schools were run like army barracks. War games were as common as traditional lessons, and the boys were pushed to their physical limits.
Toughness was the order of the day. Any display of weakness was despised. There was no pity.
Boys were taken on school outings to Jewish ghettos and concentration camps.
Trust no fox in the woods. Trust no Jew on his oath. That was essentially it. The evil Jew kept turning up. For us, it was a given that Jews were evil.
This is the story of Hitler's elite schools, the breeding grounds for the next generation of Nazi rulers. In April 1933, Hitler received a unique birthday present. The Nazi Education Ministry created a new type of school. They called them Institutions of National and Political Education, NAPOLEs for short.
They wanted to mold political fighters on the basis of National Socialist ideology. Men who could later be used to work in all areas of the state and society.
The Napole boys would be the vanguard of Hitler's new Aryan master race and central to his plan of spreading Nazi ideology around the world.
In diese Schulen, da holen wir die talentierten Kinder hinein. Die Kinder unserer breiten Masse. Arbeitersöhne, Bauernsöhne, wo die Eltern niemals es bezahlen könnten, dass ihre Kinder ein höheres Studium mitmachen. Wir haben ein fast fantastisch anmutendes Ziel. Uns schwebt ein Staat vor in der Zukunft, bei dem jede Stelle vom fähigsten Sohn unseres Volkes besetzt sein soll. Ein Staat, in dem Geburt gar nicht ist und Leistung und Können alles.
It was Hitler's intention that the Napole boys would become the new ruling class of Europe. They were destined for the top jobs in politics, industry, and above all, the military.
You're the best, they said. The word elite came up a lot. They wanted to motivate us. You're the elite, the hope for the future.
The job for our class was Gauleiter in Siberia. That was drummed into us.
Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, took a personal interest in the Napole schools. Himmler was already using military academies to turn young men into elite SS fighters. Now he planned to use the Napoles as feeder schools. He was determined to attract the very best pupils.
Listen, my boy. The Führer is starting a new school. You're doing well and your parents are Nazis. They want children like that. You'd love it, my little Aryan flag bearer.
Das wäre doch was für dich, mein Wimpelträgerchen.
Candidates had to attend selection camps that were more about physical determination and courage than intellectual prowess. Admission to the schools was seen as a great honor.
Of course, I was very proud. I could tell my classmates, and I was happy my parents were pleased. I won't say I was quite in seventh heaven, but I was immensely happy I'd passed the difficult tests.
Boys were drilled to believe they were part of an elite new breed.
We proudly bear Hitler's name and want to be the very best. No one asks where we're from. What matters is the boy alone. The half-hearted are left behind. We sing and march in step.
If the Aryan race is the best, and the German people are the best of the Aryan race, and if we're the best of the Germans, then we're the best in the world.
Die Besten von der ganzen Welt.
Arriving at school was a shock to the boys, many of whom had never before spent time away from home. The new clothes were like an army uniform, and classes were called platoons.
The first thing we had to learn was to obey. This was supposedly because only someone who can obey can give orders.
There were frequent dormitory checks, kit inspections, and flag days.
Marschiert wurde von früh bis Abend.
We marched from morning till night. After we were woken up, we went to the yard and lined up for early morning sport. We did sport together and then showered. Then we got dressed, lined up, and marched to breakfast. Then we went to our rooms, lined up again, and marched to our lessons.
Die Stuben, dann wurde wieder angetreten, dann wurde zum Unterricht marschiert.
The discipline was designed to break down individuality.
Du bist nichts, dein Volk ist alles, ja.
You're nothing. Your nation is everything. The individual no longer counted. The only thing that counted was the community, which marched to prescribed rules.
The philosophy was simple. Everyone should learn both to give and to obey orders. Boys dealt harshly with anyone who wouldn't conform.
We beat up one boy. I can still see the red wheels on his back, because we hit him with our leather belts.
Tests of courage became part of the daily routine.
If you showed weakness, you were a sissy, a coward, a disgrace to the whole squad or the whole legion.
We had to jump off a 10-meter board, fully equipped with rucksack and helmet. When you hit the surface of the water, the helmet's chin strap would almost rip your head off.
Leg die Arme fest an den Körper und dann senkrecht unten wie eine Kerze.
Ich möchte bitte lieber nicht.
Na, spring schon. Du brauchst doch keine Angst zu haben.
Ja, wir kriegten den Befehl, spring.
We were given the order, jump. First, I had to find the courage to jump into the unknown. Second, I had to trust that the person giving the order wouldn't let me jump to my death, unless it was absolutely necessary. That might happen later, when I was a soldier.
Wenn ich später älter Soldat gewesen wäre.
Boxing was seen as the perfect test of brain and brawn.
Die körperliche
When we boxed, boys from older squads were often brought in. The physical difference between 12 and 14-year-olds are huge. They really beat us up. It was all about toughness.
By 1937, Himmler's stranglehold on the Napoleons was almost total. But other leading Nazis had grown jealous. By 1937, senior Nazis had begun to distrust the SS influence over the Napoleon schools. In response, the Nazis' head of organization, WWII, founded the Adolf Hitler schools.
Wenn Sie mich fragen, was wird, so ist das genauso, als wenn Sie ein Samenkorn fragen, was aus ihm wird. Ja. Es wächst. Die Arbeit geht weiter. Das ist mal klar, nicht wahr? Wir werden uns nicht auf unseren alten Teil zurückziehen, auch keinen Lorbeerkranz ums Haupt winden. Die Arbeit geht weiter.
The Adolf Hitler schools were designed to produce politicians, not soldiers.
We were to be loyal followers of Hitler and faithful Nazis. Independent thinkers with our own will who could assert ourselves and make decisions. That wasn't possible, of course. You can't be a loyal Nazi and also think critically.
WWII himself set a poor example to the boys.
It was a fact that during his speeches in the courtyard, he was often drunk. He kept on saying the same old things. You're lucky, you've got it good, it's nice here.
Ihr habt's gut, ihr habt's schön. Das war das Aufregendste, was ich eigentlich auf der Schule.
The most exciting thing that happened to me at school was when Wolfgang Dreyer from Hamburg, School 9, suddenly stood up and said, "Reich leader, did you know that people think you're a drunk?" Then WWII slumped a little and said, rather quietly, "Boys, you can do anything. Just don't become drinkers."
Ihr dürft alles werden, eins nicht, Trinker.
The Adolf Hitler schoolboys were showered with special privileges. They wanted for nothing.
Es wurde uns viel geboten an Reisen.
We had a lot of opportunities, trips, maneuvers, as we called them. We could go skiing, and we went to the Alps and the lakes. That was unusual for a boy in those days.
If you want to seduce, you must offer seductive things. That happened to us. We were seduced very cleverly.
The most exclusive of all the elite schools was the Reichsschule at Feldafing near Munich. Here, boys boarded in mansions abandoned by wealthy Jewish businessmen.
They were mansions that used to be owned by Jews. They had either sold up because of the pressure of the boycott on April the 1st, 1933, when it didn't look as though they could stay, or they'd fled the country without selling.
The Reichsschule at Feldafing became home to the sons of high-ranking Nazi officials. These boys were promised glittering futures and were dismissive of the other elite schools.
Wir haben immer gesagt, Napola,
We always said Napola, Napola, or Adolf Hitler schools. Oh, please. We thought they were so far below us. We regarded ourselves as the best of the party schools.
In all Hitler's schools, lessons were taught within the context of Nazi philosophy. So maths was reborn as the science of war.
A plane flying at an altitude of 2,000 meters and a speed of 108 kilometers per hour drops a bomb on Warsaw. When and where does the bomb hit the ground?
In history, the main topic was the Treaty of Versailles, the peace settlement that humiliated Germany at the end of the First World War.
We were constantly reminded of that shameful peace because we had to recover the territories that were lost in 1918 and 1919. We definitely had to get them back. It was our duty to ensure we recovered them.
Hitler's schoolboys also had to learn languages to be ready one day to rule over the greater German Empire.
We were to be sophisticated, multilingual. I remember a teacher joking, "You're nothing until you speak 10 Arabic dialects without a trace of German accent."
Boys were meant to be as confident on the dance floor as on the battlefield.
Boys, I want you to be able to say, "Kiss my ass," as easily as you say, "My dear lady."
The future leaders of Germany were expected to gain experience of working in industry and on the land. The idea was to acquire an understanding of the workers they would one day control. Conversations with farmers raised some difficult questions.
What is it like now the Jews have gone? The farmer said, "Bad, the livestock trade has collapsed." Our student said he shouldn't take such a narrow view, but should think of the underlying principle. We didn't know enough to argue the practical points.
Although the elite Nazi schools boasted of excellence, educational standards were poor. At selection camps, teachers were handpicked for their commitment to National Socialism rather than their intellectual ability.
Das ist eines der Haupterziehungsmittel überhaupt gewesen, uns.
One of the main educational methods was to instill in us absolute punctuality, absolute discipline and absolute obedience.
Zu unabdingbarem Gehorsam.
Of course, as teachers, we had to pass this on to our pupils.
Natürlich auch weiter zu vermitteln hätten an unsere Schüler.
Ich habe deutlich gemerkt, dass die Erzieher, die wir hatten,
It was clear that our teachers were recruited from the Hitler Youth. They were good comrades and had the best intentions, but not enough knowledge. So, by today's standards, I think we were poorly educated.
ein bisschen Provinz. Ich muss mich schämen, wie wenig wir über deutsche Literatur.
I'm ashamed of how little we knew about German writers and poets, from Mann to Ben, and how poor our knowledge of mathematics was when I compare it with my grandchildren today. Intellectually, it was a poor result.
Geistigen Gebiet ein trauriger Abschluss gewesen.
Teachers attempted to instruct the boys in party policy.
My God, we couldn't care less about party policy. We were Nazis. For us, National Socialism was something else altogether. It was much more than purely party policy.
The son of leading Nazi Martin Bormann had to ask his father for clarification.
Vati, sag mir mal, was ist eigentlich Nationalsozialismus?
Dad, tell me, what is National Socialism?
And that was after 3 years of instruction on Mein Kampf and party policy. My father was clearly quite surprised by the question. His answer was a sentence that hit the nail on the head. National Socialism is the Führer's will, full stop. He dictates the full stop, too.
All pupils were trained to follow the Führer's orders to the letter. They learned his speeches word for word and carried his photograph in their breast pocket.
Die Erde ist ein Wanderpokal. Die Erde ist nicht für feige Völker da, nicht für Schwache und nicht für Faule, sondern die Erde ist da für denjenigen, der sie sich nimmt.
Hitler's academies had been loosely modelled on the British public school system. There was even a visit to one school by a class from Eton.
Ich finde es sehr schön. Vieles ist noch fremd für mich.
Ja, und es ist eine sehr gute Gelegenheit, sich kennenzulernen.
Nanik, ich meine, wir kommen doch gut aus miteinander.
Ja, gewiss.
At the German school, boys noticed how different the Etonians were.
Sie hatten einen Hauch von Eleganz, den wir nicht hatten.
They had a touch of elegance that we didn't have. They were relaxed and we weren't. We were the ones who marched in squads, one squad behind the other, across the parade ground.
Durch den schönen Hof marschierten.
And the Eton boys, who were visiting us, stood on the other side, leaning casually on the railing, probably saying, "What idiots."
Ganz lässig über die Balustrade gelehnt.
They were gentlemanlike. We were already little soldiers.
Wohin wir schon kleine Soldaten waren.
One subject came to dominate Hitler's classrooms more than any other. The problem of what to do with the Jews. One of the defining principles of Nazi ideology was racial purity. Race dominated Hitler's elite schools. Before pupils were allowed in, there were strict selection procedures.
Wir mussten nachweisen Rassenreinheit bis zum Jahre.
We had to prove our racial purity back to 1800. That was a big problem for me because in the first half of the 19th century, some church records were burnt. So there were gaps in my family tree.
Und das war für mich also ein richtiger Schock.
It was a real shock for me not to be accepted immediately. Instead, I had to have about 8 photos of me taken from different angles. They were sent to the SS Reich Security Office in Berlin, which had a race office.
Da gab es ein Rassenamt und
Several months later, I was incredibly relieved to hear, "You are Aryan. It's okay."
Bist arisch. Es reicht.
From the very start of Nazi rule, all German schoolchildren were taught about race. Books and magazines were written especially for children by one of Hitler's earliest supporters, Julius Streicher.
Pflanzt es in die Jugend hinein das Wissen, dass am Juden die ganze Menschheit zugrunde geht. Erzieht die Kinder zu einem gesunden Hass, zu einem gesunden Zorn. Sagt den Kindern jawohl mit der Peitsche. Hat sie hinausgehauen. Erzeugt diesen Hass.
Trust no fox in the woods. Trust no Jew on his oath. That was essentially it. The evil Jew kept turning up. For us, it was a given that Jews were evil.
At first, some teachers refused to conform.
We had one teacher who'd say, "Cross out the next sentence. Don't learn the next sentence. Put brackets around that. It's nonsense." We worked through the whole book like that at school.
In 1935, all teachers were placed directly under party control. They were told that the Jewish problem should now be the focus in the classroom.
The teachers always attacked the Jews. In our history lessons, we also had racial science, where we were told that the Aryan race was better.
This so-called racial science was used to prove the inferiority of the Jewish race.
Ich hatte dort das Problem, dass ein Lehrer mich vor die Klasse zitierte und sagte.
A teacher called me out to the front of the class and said, "Do you know what a bastard is?" We had heard about bastards in our biology class. Then he said, "This boy, his mother is Jewish. That says it all."
Das sagt ja wohl alles. Und da habe ich mich sehr gewundert.
I was very surprised that my classmates didn't react all that much.
Reagiert haben.
Children were forced to face a panel of SS medical staff.
So, jetzt machen wir die Augen ganz groß auf und schaust mich an. Ja.
Ich selber habe ihn nie gesehen.
I never saw him myself. Once I was on the Autobahn from Salzburg to Munich and his convoys sped past us in the opposite direction. I never got any closer to him than that. A blurred, shadowy figure behind the glass. And that's basically what he was like. Far away.
Das war auch im Alltag im Grund. Ganz weit weg.
Hitler's schoolboys were determined to get close to their Führer. They lined parade routes for hours, desperate for a glimpse of their hero.
An dem Abend habe ich meinen Eltern nach Hause geschrieben.
That evening I wrote home to my parents. I saw the Führer. He walked past me. I so wanted him to look at me, but he just looked straight ahead, and I was very disappointed that he didn't look at me. We were devoted to him.
Man sah dann immer diese Fotos, wo sich...
We always saw photos of him spending time with other boys, stroking a small child's cheek, putting his hand on an older boy's shoulder or on his cap. We'd have liked that. After all, we were Adolf Hitler schoolboys. We bore his name.
Wir waren schließlich Adolf Hitler Schüler. Wir trugen seinen Namen.
Nazi philosophy demanded complete subordination to the Führer's will. Attendance at somber ceremonies, where fallen Nazi heroes were commemorated, was compulsory for schoolboys. Specially composed verses promoted the idea of a glorious martyrdom.
Besitz stirbt.
Possessions die. Families die. You yourself will die like them. There is one thing that lives forever, the glory of dead men's deeds.
This was a lesson reinforced by the school's military regimes.
Im Geländesprung auf Marsch, Marsch.
In obstacle jumping, it was get up, march, march, lie down, jump up, march until we were panting. Or there was fancy dress, where you had to get changed.
Line up in full marching order in 10 minutes.
Then we were dismissed and told to come back in other, different clothes.
Ad nauseam, at least 5 or 6 times a week.
Schools conducted their own war games with reconnaissance troops and advance units. The climax was the final battle.
We died in the field games too. We had ribbons of life. When they were torn off, it meant the boy was dead.
Pupils didn't have real weapons, but at Napola schools, boys were presented with a dagger engraved with the school motto, "Be more than you seem."
We were very proud when we got the dagger. It was like a kind of initiation into manhood. like in a primitive society. But it worked.
Ich überreiche dir als äußeres Zeichen, dass du nunmehr vollständig zu unserer Gemeinschaft gehörst. Diese Waffe.
Each dagger was also engraved with a personal message.
Mine was, only real men have the strength to pit themselves against a hostile world. It came from Joseph Goebbels.
Wenn einer von uns fallen soll, der andere steht für zwei. Wenn einer von uns fallen soll, der andere steht für zwei. Denn jedem Kämpfer gab ein Gott den Kameraden bei.
Ich habe einen Kameraden gehabt, der nicht so ganz mitkam.
I had a comrade who wasn't really part of community life and felt somewhat rejected. One night he went out into the castle garden and stabbed himself with the dagger. He committed suicide with his dagger of honor.
The system was designed to push the boys to breaking point. Only this way could the regime identify the very strongest.
You had to test yourself. If I didn't want to do something, I'd ask myself, do we always have to stand up straight, and so on? Yes, you do. It's your duty to your school, your Führer, and your people.
Hey! Hier!
When the time finally came for troops to fight, boys still at school were afraid they might miss the action.
After France in 1940, our teacher said, the war will be over before your final exams. We all thought, what a nightmare.
We thought, God, they're lucky, they've made it. And we somehow felt that our turn would come too.
The schools promoted an idealized version of war. Old boys returning from the front gave talks, which they'd embellish with tales of personal heroism.
Es gab ein furchtbares Panzergefecht zwischen deutschen Panzern und Russenpanzern. Die Granaten zischten über meinen Kopf hinweg, von rückwärts und vorwärts. Entgegengaben wirften über meinen Kopf. Jetzt ließ das Feuer wieder einstellen, griff zum Karabiner, denn jetzt wurden mir die russischen Infanteristen wieder von hinten gefährlich. Sie stürmten zurück und ich legte an. Jetzt hieß es nun nur noch sicheres Auf und starke Hand, ruhig Blut und fester Stand. Ich legte an und habe nur die Russen, die auf mein Loch von hinten drauf zukamen, umgelegt.
Dann haben wir die immer bewundert, was das für Helden sind.
We wondered what it was like to be a hero, but thought we'd probably miss out on the war. They said, "Don't be sad, young comrades. We won't be dragging the war out until you're old enough. But after our final victory, there'll still be plenty to do."
Aber es gibt auch danach noch genug zu tun.
Hölderlin, Hyperion.
In Hölderlin's poem Hyperion, it says, "Messengers of victory descend, the battle is ours. Don't count the dead, not one was lost in vain." That's how they talk. Of course, no one mentioned being shot in the stomach and dying a miserable death.
As German casualties mounted, more and more of the elite schoolboys saw action. In March 1944, the head of the Napola schools reported to Himmler.
The next generation of young leaders has now proved itself against the enemy. 4 are wearing the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, 33 the Knight's Cross, 96 the Gold German Cross, and 1,226 were killed or missing in action.
Am Anfang waren wir stolz. Am Anfang.
At the beginning, we were proud to give our lives for Germany. That's how we saw it.
So dachten wir damals. Dann wurden wir
Then we were distressed because younger men who had been our older comrades at school were dying.
Jüngere, die wir noch als Gruppenführer oder überhaupt als ältere Kameraden
And it wasn't just our comrades who were dying. It was our fathers, too.
In spring 1945, reinforcements were urgently needed when Berlin came under attack. Most of the senior boys from the Potsdam Napola school were drafted to the front. Their commander was August Heissmeyer, head of the Napola schools. He rallied them with stirring words.
The Führer is in Berlin. You must be loyal to him. Wenck's army is on its way. In 24, or at the most 48 hours, we'll turn destiny around.
Heissmeyer fled Berlin shortly afterwards, leaving the boys to face a ferocious Red Army assault.
I begged my comrades to take me with them. I couldn't keep going. I was wounded and it was everyone for himself. I said to one boy, "I have a compass. Show me." I showed him. "Give it to me," he said. I said, "No, let me come with you, it's mine." "Give it to me or," he said, with his gun in his hand.
Towards the end of the war, a group of Adolf Hitler schoolboys joined the Werewolves, an undercover movement dedicated to sabotage deep behind enemy lines.
Hier spricht der Sender Werwolf, der Sender der deutschen Freiheitsbewegung in den
The movement had its own radio station to broadcast its successes to the nation. In February 1945, two Adolf Hitler schoolboys, both undercover werewolves, were caught spying on American troop movements. They were found guilty of espionage and handed the maximum sentence, death by firing squad. They were 16 and 17.
Up to the end of the war, I was learning to die for my fatherland, but I didn't learn to live for it. Our thinking was, you're nothing, your people are everything. Germany must live, even if we must die. Germany, you will shine, even if we die.
Many of the elite schoolboys ended up in prisoner of war camps, but they still dreamed that Germany would triumph.
Ich war schon in Gefangenschaft. Ein strahlender Maitag.
I was a prisoner of war. It was a beautiful day in May, with a slight breeze in a steel blue summer sky. A kind of air wave came along. I don't know what it was, but in my disappointment on the one hand and gullibility on the other, I thought it was the last ridge of a pressure wave from a miracle weapon. The air had to come from somewhere.
Irgendwo muss ja dieser Windzug herkommen.
Eigentlich war das nicht richtig, wie die zusammenbrach. Also so von uns.
From our point of view, the end was all wrong. It just wasn't the way things should have been done. There was no announcement and no Heil Hitler. There was no last roll call like the one we'd read about in the Spanish Civil War. It was simply, boys, the war's over, go home.
It was only later that the boys began to realize what their education had been for.
All those things they'd done to us had a specific aim. And that aim, it becomes clearer to me every year, was a hero's death.
Hitler's elite school system had achieved its goal in molding a generation of boys who fought with a blind allegiance to their Führer and an absolute belief in his cause. Many are still bitter about what they were taught.
Betrogen und missbraucht wurden vor allen Dingen die, die es nicht überlebt haben.
The cheated and exploited ones are those who didn't survive. That was about half of us. But anyone who did survive should admit his own stupidity and try to do better with his children and grandchildren.
Besser zu machen.
When Germany went to war in 1939, 4 out of 5 of the country's children were members of the Hitler Youth. From the age of 10, they had learned Nazi ideology and military tactics in Hitler Youth clubhouses and boot camps. The boys had been well prepared for war.
At that age, you can't imagine death properly. You don't have a real sense of fear. We would have laid down our lives for Germany. In other words, for Hitler.
Für Deutschland. Grob gesagt sogar für Hitler.
At the beginning of the war, the Hitler Youth were put to work on the home front. Boys manned the flak guns, and the Hitler Youth Fire Brigade fought the daily blazes. The very young, Hitler's most precious commodity, were evacuated to army-style camps, where they fell under the influence of SS officers. In the final years of the war, as German casualties mounted, Hitler would look to his youth movement for reinforcements.
It was dangerous to be aged 18 in those days. One of us lost an eye, another an arm. In all, we had losses of nearly 50%.
We were driven into a war and used as cannon fodder, in a way that makes a mockery of every military principle. We were expendable.
Hitler's children were going to war. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. The Wehrmacht, the German army, used Hitler Youth boys to take messages to frontline troops. One boy proud to wear the Wehrmacht armband was 16-year-old Werner Gottschall.
I rode around on my bicycle all day, holding my left arm out in front of me so everyone could see that Werner Gottschall is in the German army.
But the reality of war was very different from the glorified version the Hitler Youth boys had been taught.
I was crying and screaming and shaking so much that I had to push my bike to the local headquarters. I couldn't ride. I was so unnerved by the din and the dust and the rubble and the houses that were gone and the roofs on the street. It was dreadful.
By the 27th of September, Warsaw had fallen. The campaign had claimed more than 90,000 Polish lives.
We scoured Westerplatte in Polish territory to register the dead and attend to the injured. There were so many sad sights. I hadn't seen dead people before except at funerals laid out in a coffin, but these lay on the ground, dirty and bloody. It was an experience that took me a long, long time to get over.
Das Jugend aber wird strahlenden Herzens ohnehin erfüllen, was die Nation, der nationalsozialistische Staat von ihr erwartet und fordert.
Away from the front line, the Hitler Youth were used to plug the gaps left by men who had gone to war. Boys and girls were sent to work across Germany, in fields and factories.
Im Krieg zählt eines jeden Hand und wir verzichten gerne auf Luxus, Launen und auf Tanz. Ob jung, ob alt, ob Frau, ob Mann, auf jeden kommt es heute an.
In 1940, the Hitler Youth leadership reported that more than 5 million teenagers were working as part of the war effort. Without them, the German economy would have collapsed. Younger Hitler Youth members also wanted to help.
We collected for the Winter Relief Fund. We had to publicize it so that people would give generously. We were each allocated a doorway in the marketplace. When a whistle was blown, we yelled rhymes like, "People in your purse dig deep. Make sure you donate to winter relief." Or a macabre slogan, "Go on people, donate a lot. If you don't, you'll be shot."
These Hitler Youth boys were promised a more active role in the future by the Nazi leadership.
Pimpe aus Weida in Thüringen sammelten, wo immer sie Glück hatten, bei Bekannten und in Geschäften, 5000 Zigaretten und sandten sie an Generalfeldmarschall Rommel nach Afrika. Heute kommt die Antwort. Rommel schickt dem Pimpen zum Dank eine englische Beuteuniform, sein Bild und einen Brief. Liebe Jungs, schreibt der Generalfeldmarschall, ihr selbst werdet einmal eure Pflicht als Soldaten erfüllen. Ich hoffe, dass ihr euch dann den Geist, der euch heute beseelt, erhalten habt.
Vorbereitet waren wir alle innerlich.
We were all mentally prepared. When the war broke out, our school teacher said to us, "You'll all get a go. You'll get a go." We were young and thought the war would soon be over, but we really hoped we would get a go. I had a friend who said in all seriousness, "I want to die in battle."
Ich hatte einen Freund, der sagte allen Ernstes zu mir, "Weißt du, ich möchte fallen."
Not all young people wanted to fight Hitler's war. In Hamburg, fans of swing music congregated at private parties.
Swing music represented a boundless freedom. Think of the times we lived in. Young people were restricted by the state. The state dictated to them what they could listen to and what they couldn't. You must also bear in mind that it was wartime. Cigarettes and food were rationed. Young people were called up. When they played swing music with their friends for a few hours, they forgot all the misery around them.
Fans of swing associated the music with the American way of life. It was a million miles away from the regimented discipline of the Hitler Youth.
Dem Gesetz der Rhythmen können wir Menschen uns nicht entziehen. Jede Militärkapelle zwingt uns, wir wollen oder nicht, im gleichen Schritt mitzumarschieren. Es kostet uns Mühe, gegen den Rhythmus der Musik anzugehen.
Der deutsche Junge.
A German boy had to be a loyal German. Loyalty is the mark of honor. That was the motto of the SS, but also of the Hitler Youth. In those days, there was a swing song called the Flatfoot Flugie.
Swingtitel. Der hieß The Flatfoot Flugie. It's a nonsense title.
It's a nonsensical title. It doesn't really mean anything. When it was dark, my swing friends and I used to walk along the Jungfernsteg in Hamburg with an umbrella, 1 foot on the curb, 1 foot on the road, singing.
Regenschirm und dann immer mit einem Fuß auf dem Bordstein, mit dem anderen Fuß auf der Fahrbahn und dann the Flatfoot Flugie.
The Flatfoot Flugie with the Floy, Joy.
Floy, the Flatfoot Flugie with the Floy, treu, Deutsch, treu.
Loyal German, loyal German, loyal German. The first time I remember thinking, are you allowed to say anything so facetious? I found it really hard to do.
Das ist mir schwer gefallen, das zu machen.
The Flatfoot Flugie with the Floy, Floy. The Flatfoot Flugie with the Floy, Floy. The Flatfoot Flugie with
The Nazis disapproved of swing.
A dictatorship needs the young to be soldiers. Then along came these youngsters who looked totally unmilitary in their check suits and crepe-soled shoes and with long hair. Besides, a lot of swing music was played by blacks, and it had its roots in Africa.
Oder in USA.
In 1942, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, wrote to his deputy Reinhard Heydrich, saying that swing fans are degenerate and should be sent to concentration camps.
We knew there were concentration camps. We thought you went there, worked and got your food. But that you died there and starved. We didn't know that.
Over 1,000 young German men were sent to the youth protection camp at Moringen. Here they were tortured, and more than 150 were executed on charges of high treason. On the 11th of May 1940, Allied leaders took the decision to bomb German cities. Within hours, the first bombs were falling on Berlin, Hamburg and Hanover. Over the next 4 years, Allied bombers brought terror to German civilians.
In that air raid shelter, I saw women throw themselves on the ground and scream, pray and panic when the light flickered and the fresh air pipe rattled. We could hear the rumbling of the bombers as they got nearer, and the detonations came and then died away. Then came the next wave, and then the next.
By 1944, the raids were happening every night.
Und dann saß man unten im Luftschutzkeller. Und da habe ich Leute gesehen, die hatten...
Then we sat in the air raid shelter. I saw men who were covered in war medals, close combat awards, everything. Sergeants and officers too, who were utterly terror-stricken. They shook with fear. At the front, you knew where the enemy was. But being in the cellar of an 8-story house that could collapse on you at any moment felt like the most terrifying experience anyone could go through. It was the same for me. I was scared shitless.
Hitler rallied the nation.
Zunächst steht auf der Welt das Gesetz der Auslese. Und der Kräftigere und der Gesündere, der hat von der Natur das Lebensrecht bekommen. Weh dem, der schwach ist, der nicht auf einem Boden steht, der darf von niemandem irgendeine Hilfe erwarten.
Hitler, das war...
Hitler was beyond our reach. I'd go further and say he was God. My greatest dream would have been for him to come into our air raid shelter. As a child, one has these fantasies, and put his heavy, godlike Hitler hand on my shoulder and say, "You are a young German soldier."
Junger deutscher Soldat.
Dann kommt eine neue deutsche Jugend und die dressieren wir schon von ganz Kleinem an für diesen neuen Staat. Wir wollen jetzt einmal ganz eiskalt und nüchtern die Interessen unseres Volkes verteidigen.
1942
In 1942, my father came home on leave. He'd been called up. I was already in bed, and I heard him say to my mother, "If someone doesn't shoot Hitler dead soon, he'll lead us to ruin." To me, it was awful that my father could say that about our beloved Führer. We'd been indoctrinated. We knew no better. I remember even wondering whether I should report it.
Ich weiß noch, dass ich mir sogar überlegt habe, ob ich das nicht melden müsste.
As the bombing took an ever greater toll, the Nazis decided that the nation's most precious resource had to be protected. Children were evacuated to the countryside and lived in camps run by the Hitler Youth. The evacuees faced a punishing regime.
The drill we had in that camp was harsher than it was for many soldiers. We had team leaders on convalescent leave from the SS, from the Labour Service and from teacher training courses. They all had their own set programs and they wanted to try them out on us. The first ones came and worked us half to death. They worked our asses off.
Newsreels showed the evacuees enjoying happy, healthy holidays.
In one sense, we were barbarians. We did field exercises and the usual drill. But we were also taught how to kill animals, cut off chickens' heads, kill hares, wring pigeons' necks and the like. They were barbaric tactics to toughen us up.
Na
Kitty, was machst du denn? Willst du noch nach Hause schreiben? Ja. Na, du hast ja noch gar nichts auf deinem Bogen drauf. Wie fängt man denn einen Brief an? Natürlich, meinen lieben Eltern.
Ich bin gesund, wie eine Rübe.
Ich hatte einmal eine falsche Anschrift.
I once made a mistake in the address and my letter was returned. Then I saw that parts of my letter had been blacked out. In other words, what I wrote was being controlled. Perhaps I wasn't saying the right thing, or maybe it was all meant to be a secret.
If you dared help yourself to pudding, even a teaspoonful of it, you were punished.
Occasional successes.
Wir waren aber aufgrund unseres
We were so excited about shooting the plane down that we didn't stop to think. We ran straight over. It was pure curiosity.
Und dann kam auch noch.
But there were other factors. We were very interested in weapons. We were very interested in munitions. We were very interested in the uniforms, the pilots' clothes. I confess that we were so heartless at the time. We even tore the clothes off the dead pilot's body.
Toten Piloten sogar Bekleidungsstücke vom Leib gezogen haben.
The teenage flak gunners were among the first of the Hitler Youth boys called to combat. Soon, many more would see active service. By 1942, 250,000 German soldiers had died. More and more young men were needed to fight Hitler's war.
When I think of the losses, I have a mental picture of the roll of honor at my high school. The art teacher painted over an old drawing board and wrote 6 names on it after the Polish campaign and another 6 names after the French campaign. Eventually, the board was full. Another was hung underneath, then one to the left, then one to the right.
Nächste Tafel links, eine nächste Tafel rechts.
Unermesslich sind die Aufgaben, die uns gestellt sind, die auch sein mögen. Gelöst zu werden vermögen sie nur durch einen geschlossenen Volkskörper. Und dieses Volk wird nicht erzogen in den alten Generationen, sondern es wird erzogen immer und immer in seiner Jugend. Und deshalb bin ich so stolz und so glücklich, wenn ich euch sehe.
The Nazis used big-budget feature films to sell their cause to the nation's youth. These epics taught children about the honor of dying for one's country.
Cadets was a film set in the time of Frederick the Great, but it was about my generation. It was about cadets. Matthias Fielmann was in it. It made a big impression on us. We used to sing their song, "How I long to meet the foe, when out on patrol I go."
Die kommen, Mauermeister!
Los, schieß, was rausgeht!
Was hat er denn? Sein Bein ist zerschmettert. Mir tut's auch nicht mehr weh. Du musst ganz still liegen, hörst du?
Er hat Rahmen aus den Steinen gezogen. Dabei ist er selber erwischt worden. Am Kopf und am Rücken.
Na, ich weiß nicht. Ich weiß nicht. Eigentlich seid ihr doch gar kein so schlechter Jahrgang.
Nun kann man sich in dem Alter den Tod ja auch wohl nicht richtig ausmalen.
At that age, you can't imagine death properly. You don't have a real sense of fear. We would have laid down our lives for Germany. In other words, for Hitler.
Grob gesagt sogar für Hitler.
Grenadiere und Pioniere müssen ganze Kerle sein. Mit ihrem harten Einsatz macht sich die Hitlerjugend in ihrer Wehrertüchtigung bereits vertraut. Später wird es sich im Kampf mit dem Feind bewähren.
The Hitler Youth had always practiced military tactics in their training camps, but from 1942 the drill became even more rigorous. Boys took part in 3-week courses where they reenacted army maneuvers from earlier in the war.
Boys who joined the infantry had already done field training. They knew about camouflage and how to move in the woods or over a field or meadow. They could even dig a foxhole for cover while lying down and under shell fire. That's what they'd practiced in the Hitler Youth.
It was expected that all Hitler Youth boys would fight in the armed forces.
Dann gehörte er aber auch zu einer Gemeinschaft verschworener Krieger, zu einer Besatzung, mit der man den Teufel den Bart abschneiden kann. Unser Führer Adolf Hitler. Sieg! Heil! Sieg! Heil! Sieg! Heil!
Those who couldn't make the grade were ritually humiliated.
I had to train on my own on the parade ground. I had to go out there and shout, "I'm a big idiot." I didn't mind that. But then I was told to hop across the parade ground and shout, "The Navy will be better off without me." That really upset me.
The Battle of Stalingrad in the winter of 1942 was a major turning point in Germany's war. Hitler became obsessed with holding the city that bore his greatest enemy's name. Most of those involved in the 75-day fight had once been Hitler Youth boys.
I remember one very young man. He had a very serious stomach wound. There was no hope for him. He was so proud that the mayor in Frankfurt had awarded him a medal for pulling 2 children out of the River Main. He was so proud of that. He was a really young fellow. He died, of course.
I had a huge hole in my lung and ribs, and I breathed through that. My mouth and my nose were blocked. It made a whistling sound. I thought I was a goner. I thought, you've just turned 18. Must you really defend this patch of Russian earth? Must you die here? I don't want to die. That's what I kept thinking.
Of the 300,000 German soldiers at Stalingrad, more than half died. A further 90,000 were captured by the Russians. Only 6,000 of these would ever return home.
Und jeder Deutsche noch in 1000 Jahren muss mit heiligen Schauern das Wort Stalingrad aussprechen und sich erinnern, dass dort Deutschland letzten Endes doch den Stempel zum Endsieg gesetzt hat.
When the Aryan sees no way out, he glorifies his downfall. They painted fighting till the last man was dead as heroic and valiant, rather than colossal self-destructive stupidity.
My battery only has 26 shells left. Here we crouch, still young, but no longer stupid. We once shouted Heil Hitler along with everyone else, but now we must perish or be sent to Siberia.
After the defeat at Stalingrad, the Nazis demanded a new level of commitment from the nation.
Das deutsche Volk wehrt sich gegen die totalen Kriegsmaßnahmen der Regierung. Es will nicht den totalen Krieg, sagen die Engländer, sondern die Kapitulation. Seid ihr
wir entschlossen, dem Führer in der Erkämpfung des Sieges durch dick und dünn unter schwersten persönlichen Belastungen zu folgen.
Wenn man sich das heute ansieht.
When you see that today, it's unbelievable how people could be seduced, especially the young.
Insbesondere eben junge Menschen.
The Hitler Youth leaders ensured that their boys heeded the call to total war.
Deutsche Jugend ist angetreten, vor aller Welt zu beweisen, dass sie der feindliche Vernichtungswille und Terror nicht brechen kann, sondern sie nur härter und gläubiger macht für den Kampf unser herrliches Großdeutsches Reich.
But not everyone was happy to serve Hitler.
The idea that we might lose the war after what we'd done to other countries, this unconscious sense of guilt played a huge role. The feeling we had burnt our bridges. There was only victory or downfall. Among many young people, this feeling was very deep-rooted.
Felsenfest verankert.
Wo wir sind, da ist immer vorne, und der Teufel lacht nur dazu. Ha, 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 wir kämpfen.
The Waffen-SS was one of Germany's most ruthless fighting forces. Its chief, Heinrich Himmler, saw the Hitler Youth as a plentiful source of new recruits.
When I went in, 3 or 4 men were sitting at a table. One said, "Someone like you, tall, strong, healthy, you'd suit the Waffen-SS. How about it?" That really turned my head. The Waffen-SS were an elite guard. Of course I wanted to join an elite guard. I clicked my heels and said, "Yes, sir."
The Waffen-SS organized elaborate advertising campaigns to attract Hitler Youth boys. They used the idea of exclusivity as a seductive tool.
When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen. I said, "Mum, I'm joining the Waffen-SS, the elite guard." Then I looked at her. She looked right through me and started to cry. Then she flew into a rage. "I knew you'd end up like this. You didn't listen to your dad. They're all criminals."
Du hast nie auf der Vater gehört. Das sind doch alles Verbrecher.
Im Westen besucht Reichsjugendführer Axmann die SS-Panzerdivision Hitlerjugend. In einer Ansprache sagt der Reichsjugendführer, die Haltung dieser jungen Soldaten und ihrer Führer ließ diese Truppe zum Sinnbild einer wahrhaft nationalsozialistischen Division werden.
Axmann volunteered 20,000 Hitler Youth boys for service in the Waffen-SS.
Der Reichsjugendführer.
The Reich youth leader gave the Führer a Hitler Youth division for his birthday on the 20th of April.
Eine Hitlerjugenddivision.
It was a warped birthday present. But it didn't occur to me then that it's monstrous to give children as a present just so they can be sent to die.
Zum Geburtstag geschenkt bekommt, zum Sterben.
As the Second World War entered its final decisive year, boys as young as 14 would be called upon to fight for Hitler. On the 6th of June 1944, D-Day, one group of teenagers was sent in to defend the Normandy beaches. Because of their age, they were nicknamed the Baby Division.
At first we thought, my God, now they're taking the children. But then we saw the children fight. I saw them myself on the stretch from Saint-Lô. I had my sights on an American tank and was going to fire, when to my horror I saw a German soldier waving his bazooka to stop us from firing. He then blew himself up with the tank. He gave his life. He had fired from under the tank.
In their first action against Canadian troops, the Baby Division knocked out 28 tanks and only lost 6 of their own.
We thought we were special. Special heroes, although we didn't use that word. We thought we were the best division in the German army. We saw any losses as proof of how tough we were and how hard we fought.
The Hitler Youth troops were ordered to hold the Normandy town of Caen at any cost. The townspeople were filled with horror as the boy soldiers arrived.
They marched in a column along a Caen street, empty of civilians. They machine-gunned every window, every flutter of a curtain. They were bareheaded, singing in their armored vehicle. You could sense their determination and absolute fanaticism. Soon afterwards, they got caught by British artillery. They were truly men of war.
A few days later, the Baby Division fought to keep open an escape corridor for thousands of German troops.
The boys were sent to the firing line. They allowed themselves to be killed in their foxholes. They didn't realize that the war was already lost. They sacrificed themselves for Germany for nothing.
They were bigger heroes than us because of their stupidity and inexperience. When you've been at the front and been wounded and have seen the corpses, you know what it's like. They were able to be brave because they didn't think about what could happen.
Weil sie nicht überlegt haben, was kann passieren.